Hello, today's video is going to be about 10 foods that you can plant in your own forest garden that will be producing more or less right now at the end of summer. I'll cover some of the characteristics of those species, what they need, the light conditions, how they taste, I guess sometimes. Enjoy. To start, we have something that I'm very excited for. This is an Akebia, Akebia trifolia or Akebia quinata. There are two species in the same, well, they make the same fruit, which you see here. It's also called chocolate vine because the flowers smell a little bit like chocolate. And I'm very excited for this because I have never tried one before. This is the first one we will have in this forest, and I'm so excited. It is a climber or a ground cover, depending on where you plant it. It wants to grow into trees. It does really well in part shade, but it does want to grow out into full sun. So, the more sun it gets, the more it will produce. It also needs multiple varieties within the same species to produce. So we've had it here for 6-7 years and maybe more, and it hasn't produced yet because we didn't have, we had the two species, Quinata and Trifolia, but I guess they weren't pollinating, so we had to get another variety within the same species to cross-pollinate, and now it's finally producing, and I'm quite excited to try it. I think you eat the center of the fruit, and you can fry and cook up the skin of the fruit, which is a little bitter, but let's see how it tastes. So, this is the Akebia. We know it's ripe because it's opened up. It starts out closed like so, and then it only opens up slowly as it's ripe, so this should be well ripe. Hopefully not overripe. Oh, it's got like a gelatinous casing and it's a bunch of seeds inside. It smells really interesting. It's very soft, not much. Don't know if you're supposed to eat the seeds or not, but the fruity jelly on the outside is really delicious. If I just suck on that, it's great. Okay, I'm gonna try the skin later. Let's see what happens. Delicious! Here we have a hazelnut, one of my favorite species. It produces in part shade, full sun, is super resilient, doesn't need a lot of fertility or light or water, depending on the variety you get. It is a river tree, so it does prefer water, but this, for example, is a variety from a drier part of Spain, so most years it produces really well. This year, production has been spectacular, I think. We've got about 50 kilos of hazelnuts, super delicious, super resilient, really nice wood as well for basketry making if you prune it in the right way. It's just kind of an all-around base, I would say, of an ecosystem. Super interesting that, after the last ice age, this was the species that humans brought with them farther and farther north because it just kept producing, and it was a very reliable base of their diet. They just kept planting it as glaciers receded, and they just kept bringing it farther and farther. We have it in all sorts of niches. We have it under trees in full sun, and it just produces in all sorts of places. It's also got really nice nuts, these varieties. They're much larger than the wild varieties you'll usually find. So it takes a little bit to shell and get them open, but once you do, super delicious, super productive. One of my favorites, hazelnut. Here we have a Nashi pear or Asian pear, which is a regular pear but from Asia. It's got a little bit more of a shape like an apple. It doesn't have the regular pear shape. It's a small tree, usually not growing over 4 or 5 meters, just like a regular fruit tree. Something to keep in mind when you do plant nashis is that they do need pollinators, so you need 2 trees nearby so they can cross-pollinate. We've got one here right above you, and another just in the background there that you can't really see. But they're producing pretty well. They only took 3 or 4 years to start producing. Let's see what it tastes like. Sweet, a little sour, just the smallest amount of sour. It makes it really tasty. It does have that pear consistency. And the skin is kind of tough, but in a good way. And this one in particular tastes like, because it's kind of late in the season, it's more of like a mid-August fruit. So this one in particular tastes just the smallest bit fermented, which actually makes it a little even tastier for my palate. So, quite nice. Nashi pear. Here you can't see it because it's already dried out, so I thought I would just kind of show you. It is a pumpkin. Pumpkin is usually associated with October, but they're starting to ripen right about now, late August, early September. And what's super special about this one is that even though it has full sun, it was not watered basically all summer. I left for about 6 weeks, my brother also for 2 months. So just with a lot of mulch, we created a garden bed that fed it for basically the entire summer with only minimal help. And here we have full pumpkin. Pretty dope. So pumpkin, really what it needs is a lot of water and a lot of fertility. So the bud's completely jam-packed with as much mulch as we could give it. I think protected from the heat. Also, it wasn't the hottest summer, so it had enough humidity and the fertility was all there. So we had a nice big pumpkin. Can't wait to make some soup. So here we have autumn olive, which is a nitrogen fixing bush. It grows till about 2 meters and it's okay in full sun, part shade, full shade. Here we have one that is completely in full shade. And I think that's actually delayed the harvest. So the other autumn olives we have, they produced in about late July, early August. This one is late August, early September. But it is completely in the shade. I mean, I don't think it gets a single hour of full sun, and it's also still young, so it's also not feeding on previous year's stored energy. It is just happy in this shady condition. It's also very drought tolerant. We have a few planted just in full sun, poor soil, and they are doing phenomenally. They haven't stopped growing in 4 years since we've planted them. So I'm really happy with this bush. I think it's tremendous. The berry is quite tasty, but you have to get it at the exact right moment. If you get it a little too soon, it's quite astringent, but it makes really, really delicious jam. So it's a very special bush for forest gardening, I think, just because of the productivity of the berry in most conditions and the nitrogen fixation. Autumn olive. Here we have Japanese walnut, which is just starting to drop now in early September. It's basically the walnut that they have in Japan, except it's also called a heart nut because the nut, instead of being in the shape of a brain, is in the shape of a heart. It needs to be harvested and dried, same as a walnut, so it drops green, then it slowly dries out, and the nut is inside, and it looks almost identical to a walnut. And I wish I could try it for you, but it is a very, very hard shell. There are varieties with a very soft shell. In fact, when I first read about this tree, it was described as having a very soft shell, and I was so excited the first time I got it. I started to crack it, and I couldn't do it with rocks or a nutcracker. It's very hard. So in the future, we will try and find this soft-shelled variety, but other than that, it is very prolific. It doesn't grow like a regular walnut in terms of, very tall and wide. It is probably twice as wide as a regular walnut in the first few years. It grows horizontally more than vertically, even though it is also a full sun tree. It doesn't get as tall as a regular walnut, and it definitely doesn't live as long. So it's shorter lived, wider, and in a shape of a heart, but also very delicious, very nutritious. Heart nut. So here's a pretty obvious one for most people, but I really want to talk about the space that it's in. So it's corn, and they're kind of all falling over just from the weight in this space. and it's a little bit late in the season. They don't have the support they usually do, but you can see it's a pretty nice cob here. So what's really exciting to me is that, there was nothing plowed here. It's in the garden. It's surrounded by a bunch of different species. We've got beans, sunflower, comfreys. It's got some willow and apple and rosemary to the side of it. It is getting full sun, which it needs, but it's here intermixed with everything, and it doesn't need this monoculture that most people believe that it needs. It doesn't need plowed soil. It just needs loose, fertile soil. And once it has that, it's happy. So let's see what it looks like. Woo. Really nice color. This is a beautiful red corn. It's native to, it's a local corn we've been growing here for a while. Really beautiful color. Really happy with this. So plant some, eat some. I'm excited. Ooh, corn! This is a bush about 2.5 meters tall. It's called pineapple sage. It's edible, but usually better for things like tea. If you are depressed, this is a tea that is said to help with that sort of stuff. Also a really pretty flower that I think you can, it's got some sweet nectar you can suck out. Really delicious. Here we have it growing in mostly full sun, but with a little bit of shade to the west. I've also seen it in pretty much complete shade, still growing well, because in the end it's just a leaf that you're growing. Flavor, it's a little bit like pineapple, but it's just like this sweet flavor, nothing like regular sage. So here we have a yellow raspberry, kind of I guess a small bush or large herbaceous plant. Doesn't grow more than 2 meters. Basically growing completely in the shade. It's just starting now to produce for the second time this year. Usually produces maybe mid-spring and late summer, depending on how you prune it. The yellow is super delicious. I prefer it to the red one we've been eating our whole life. Oh, I'm actually surprised it's pretty sweet. It's growing here in kind of full shade, so it's not as vigorous as it has been in previous years, but still producing well. I'll probably end up transplanting some of these to a sunnier spot because I really like raspberries and I want a few more. But for this niche, it's actually really impressive. It's beneath a hazel, a bladdernut, an empress, and it's got another hazel to the east. So really, I think it might get about half hour to 45 minutes, maybe an hour of full sun a day, and really delicious. So good for understory. So it's a raspberry. We've known it our whole lives. Here it is. Here we have a hickory. It's a canopy tree, probably grows to about 30 meters, I'm guessing. Needs full sun in that case. Has a very delicious nut. It's a cousin of the walnut, so it looks and tastes a lot like it. But it can also withstand temperatures down to about 30 degrees, and it has, I think, less disease than most walnuts, so it's a little bit hardier for climates that might get a little colder. Also, I've just learned that its wood is some of the hardest that you can find in temperate environments, so it's been used to make like tool handles, actually airplanes in the past, because it's very dense and strong wood. Some of the densest and strongest you'll find in these parts. Also, its nut is similar to walnut in that it falls green, but if you let it rot for too long, it'll turn black, and that will actually kind of eat its way into the nut. So you want to dry it well, break it out, and then in that process you will find the flavor will also deepen. Right now it kind of tastes watery and not quite delicious. It's still good, but it's like a wet walnut. It's nicer if you dry it and then eat it like that. So, hickory.